Welcome back, as always. It is your friend, Arachnid Soul, coming to you today with something a little bit different. This one's not going to be easy for me. Once in a while, I do one of these recordings, and I know it's A, not going to be easy for me, and B, is going to be something that really shifts the feel of me, of this channel, of whatever. I gotta tell you a story before we get to the shank of the evening. Before we get into anything, do me a favor, hit that like, hit that subscribe, leave a comment. I want to know what all you think about this. Let's go back to 2002. WCW was out of business. ECW was out of business. You really only had the WWE in terms of major promotions. And it was sometime after 9/11 in 2001 where Jeff Jarrett released a press conference, and he was talking about NWA TNA, Total Nonstop Action, from the National Wrestling Alliance. And he talked about how he had signed AJ Styles. I knew AJ Styles from Wildside, not even Air Styles from Nitro. I knew him back from Wildside. NWA Wildside, go look it up, about 1999. And I said, man, they got AJ Styles? Already I knew he might be the best wrestler in the world. I remember debating back then, is it AJ Styles or is it RVD? Who's best at that style, at least, on the planet? Never came up with an answer. But then they said they had Mike Tenay as the announcer, and that's when my ears perked up, because I said they got Mike Tenay. They got the best professional wrestling announcer on the planet. And that's when I got excited. I started watching it. America's Most Wanted, James Storm and Wildcat Chris Harris, the Tennessee Cowboy James Storm. Still my favorite tag team ever in wrestling. That covers a lot of ground. And I loved TNA. I watched TNA. I supported TNA. And you have to remember the atmosphere that existed between WWF and WCW. Where I grew up, it was mostly WCW people. As a matter of fact, growing up on the West Coast, you would get WCW early because it was airing live on the East Coast, and then Raw would come on during the Nitro rebroadcast, and more people would watch Nitro a second time than watch Raw a first time. But when WCW started going downhill, you noticed people were jumping ship. And then when WCW was finally out of business and Vince McMahon, owner, CEO, and whatever else of WWF at the time, decided to buy WCW, the feeling was, oh, they're going to double the ratings because it's going to be the WWF usual fans as well as the WCW fans. And those fans did not show up. Those fans were not there. But TNA starting. Nobody knew about TNA, but I knew about TNA. And the wrestling fans that were left were the WWF fans. And basically, anything that wasn't WWF, either they didn't know about it, or they tried it one time and determined it sucked. Another thing they would do, they'd hear rumors about stuff, and they would just determine it sucked. So they got on board with WWF in a generation where I basically left. 2 years after that, I'm like, I'm done with this company. And for the people who watched at that point, I've just figured out recently that it was called the Ruthless Aggression Era. I guess it was hailed in by Chris Benoit and some other people. I don't know. And I wasn't watching. I haven't watched WWE in a number of years, to the point where I still want to call it WWF. Saying WWE to me, even at this point, is weird. To me, I still think of that as the World Wrestling Federation. WCW was gone, ECW was gone, and we had an era of the WWF fanboy. These were the people who would tell you TNA sucked, Ring of Honor sucked, Pro Wrestling Noah sucked, New Japan Pro Wrestling sucked, All Japan Pro Wrestling sucked, CMLL sucked, AAA sucked, and anything in the indies sucked. Unless it was goofy, nonsensical bullshit Then these people would halfway get behind it in the indies, but apparently they still had half a brain for quality wrestling. Wrestling, not just people who call themselves wrestlers in a wrestling ring, but actually professional wrestling. Skip ahead a number of years. I've been watching TNA at that point the entire time. I watched the Wednesday night pay-per-views. When they had Victory Road, the first ever pay-per-view, back in November of 2004, I was probably the first person to order that pay-per-view. I watched that pay-per-view. I watched Final Resolution. I watched Genesis. As a matter of fact, I ordered every single TNA 3-hour pay-per-view for a number of years. There were only 2 that I missed because my TV was out, and I went back and watched those later. When they started selling merchandise, I bought TNA merchandise. When they started having house shows, I went to TNA house shows. Always supported TNA. In fact, if you go back and you look at this channel and you look at the years, when I was doing Throwdown Wrestling, when I was doing Fire Pro Wrestling, when I was doing all sorts of things, I would always include Impact Wrestling, TNA, and I would always give you an accurate description of how I felt about that company and what that company was actually doing, as opposed to the people who just blindly bash TNA. The people who would say bullshit like, oh, Hulk Hogan ruined TNA because when he came in, it was Honky Tonk Man and Brutus the Barber Beefcake and all this shit that we heard before Hogan showed up. These people have continued to say it. They won't tell you, oh, well, Hogan was the guy who showed up and gave a lot of young guys a chance that wouldn't have had it. When did Bobby Roode become the world champion? When did Eric Young become the world champion? When did we see guys like Samoa Joe and a lot of these other guys step up? And I know Joe might have been a little bit earlier, but I think if you look at the roster of champions and people who were brought up during that Hulk Hogan era, you see it wasn't what people thought it was going to be beforehand, and a lot of people just haven't gone back and reviewed that evidence. That's the Hogan era. Again, this is an uncomfortable video for me to even make. This is an uncomfortable commentary for me to ever do. There has been no bigger fan of Impact Wrestling, of TNA, going not just back to day one, but even before the company started, just getting excited about it. Obviously, I withheld judgment until I saw it, but once I saw that tag division, once I saw that X division, once I heard Mike Tenay doing commentary finally with the chains off, I was like, this is GG. We're going to roll with this one for a minute. At that time when ECW and WCW were gone, I seriously thought, do I even want to watch wrestling anymore? Do I even want to watch anymore? But I still had Ring of Honor, I still had New Japan and Impact Wrestling. And when Impact and Ring of Honor started, I said, okay, there's still pro wrestling. There's still pro wrestling that I can enjoy, that I can watch, that I can have in my life. And this happened for a number of years. When Impact Wrestling was in the Hammerstein Ballroom, I went and saw Impact Wrestling. When Impact Wrestling was out on Coney Island, the biggest event they ever did in terms of fans to that point, 5,000 people in a baseball field, Coney Island. It was insane. They eventually topped that in Texas with Slammiversary and some other things. Skip ahead, and I suspected back in 2009, 2010, I said, I don't think this is going to go well. I don't think this sport's going to go well from here on out. I'm seeing a lot of nonsense in the indie scene. The indie scene used to be the place that you would go, believe it or not, to get away from goofy, silly, nonsensical shit in wrestling. That was the stuff you saw on Monday nights. When you tuned into indie wrestling, it was Samoa Joe, it was American Dragon Bryan Danielson, it was Low-Key, it was Fallen Angel Christopher Daniels, it was AJ Styles, it was Amazing Red, it was guys wrestling. It was some of the best athletes with some of the best psychology we'd ever seen in this sport. Skip ahead to today. Now you've got guys running around saying that they're all elite, which is fine. You can say whatever you want, but to someone like me who withholds judgment and waits to actually see the same way I did with TNA, I said, okay, all the usual suspects who I ignore here, the Superkick Twins, Orange Juice Cassidy, Kenny Omaha, all these people are involved with this company. Didn't really have a lot of bad things to say about Cody Rhodes other than he's kind of dull, but I would take dull over goofy. But I said, let's go to this first AEW pay-per-view. Let's see what this company's doing. Let's give them a fair shake. So I bought a ticket, as I've said before, the most expensive pro wrestling ticket ever purchased by me or anyone I ever went to a wrestling event with. And we sat there, and this was the AEW Double or Nothing pay-per-view, the first one they ever did. I think that was the name of it. They had a pre-show, and then they opened up the actual pay-per-view with a casino poker battle royale where wrestlers picked suits, and apparently when a card suit came up, all 12 wrestlers that had picked that suit came out together and joined the battle royale. During the pre-show, I said, okay, we got a little bit of wrestling here. I believe that was Christopher Daniels and Scorpio Sky and Frankie Kazarian. If that wasn't the pre-show, I apologize. Maybe that was the actual pay-per-view. But they came out and there was wrestling, and I said, oh my God, good. This is not going to be the silly, goofy, embarrassing bullshit that I thought it might be. But we did get some of that bullshit during the pre-show, and I remember thinking, if I were not here at this point, sitting in this building, I would have already turned this off. I'd be doing something else. But I was there. And that was the first hour, the pre-show. I want to say they held us for another 3 or 4 hours. I mean, when you go to an AEW event, you're there all night. And you can only laugh so much. So I went to this pay-per-view. And basically the pay-per-view the entire time was telling me, this is exactly the goofy organization you thought it would be. There's some great talent here, but nobody knows how to use it. There's no gatekeeper. And people are just going to let anybody do whatever they want to do. And that's how it was. Chris Jericho came out. He had a good match. He had a good match against Omega, I believe. I can't even remember. I think it was just Jericho wrestling someone, but Jericho was the highlight. And also the Rhodes brothers, Cody and Dustin, they had a good match. And there was some decent wrestling in some non-wrestling matches the rest of the night. But it was basically goofy bullshit. And I tune in to watch AEW occasionally, and I don't make it very long, couple of segments at best. Or if they say that we got Shaq, we got Mike Tyson, I don't care. I'm not tuning in to see Shaq or Mike Tyson, but I am tuning in just to see if I tune in and with all the publicity, what number can they do? What ratings number can they do? Let's see the best number they can get. And every time I tune in, it's just nonsense. It doesn't make sense. It's silly. It's goofy. It's embarrassing. I had not talked to a lot of AEW fans until recently, and I have some friends that are. So I sat down and I asked them some questions. And basically what I can figure out, what I can make sense of, because I watched this and I said, how can pro wrestling fans watch this nonsense? My friends who are AEW fans have given me some version of their wrestling fans, and they won't admit this, but they're wrestling fans. They like wrestling, but they don't actually like pro wrestling. They just like this type of stuff that is now being called pro wrestling. So in other words, if you showed them something maybe from 15 years ago, they're like, yeah, that's actually pro wrestling. We don't like that. We think it's dull. We think it's boring. We want to laugh. We want to joke around. We want to go sit and watch a combat sport and have a smile on our face for 6 hours. We want 23 people in a ladder match. We want casino battle royales. We want first undisputed champions in the past 100 years wrestling on TV in Orange Juice. We want to bring Sting in, hype him up, but at the same time not tell anyone so we don't get ratings, and then we don't know what to do with him as people keep coming back. We don't know what to do with Shaq. We don't know what to do with Mike Tyson. This is all the stuff they want to see. They enjoy this. This is what they want to see when they watch pro wrestling. Me, on the other hand, that's not what I want to see when I watch pro wrestling. When I watch pro wrestling, I want to watch wrestling. That's why Throwdown Wrestling was wrestling. That's why anytime I have wrestling on the channel, there's a sense of respect for it. There's a sense of decorum for it. There's a sense of appreciating the tradition and the people who have died doing this and have been seriously injured doing this or got paralyzed doing this. Families over generations who have put food on the table doing this, and more families who wanted to, over future generations, do the same thing. That is what I bring to the table every time I present you with anything involving pro wrestling. I've always done it, always will do it, and that's a promise. And when I decided to come back last year, the one thing that they said to me, the one thing that my wrestling friends and the different people I know who are on YouTube and Twitch doing wrestling said to me is, you can say whatever you want, but you can't say anything bad. Please, please do not say anything bad about Kenny Omaha. Whatever you do, or the Super Kick Twins, whatever you do, please, even though they are professional athletes, even though you grew up and you watched ECW and you thought, well, nothing's off limits, you can say whatever you want because these guys are tough. These guys go in the ring. They have one of the most brutal jobs on the planet in terms of their bodies. The number of them that die before the age of 40 is much higher than in other sports. These are tough guys. They can take it, and they probably could take it, but the fans can't take it. The fans can't take it. The fans cannot take if you make fun of Kenny Omaha. And this all ties together because back in 2016, when I was doing Throwdown and we were talking about wrestling, back in 2015, back in 2014, we were talking about wrestling, Japanese pro wrestling, Puro, whatever you want to call it, Joshi with the women, whatever you want to call it. And then there was a little bit of a poison that crept in. I liked the Bullet Club. I liked Prince Devitt. I liked AJ Styles. But all of a sudden, they went from being a feared group to being a group to be mocked, to be laughed at, to be ridiculed, to not be taken seriously. And at that point, when they took over New Japan because of the merchandise and they got hot, I got kind of cold on New Japan. And that's one of the reasons I kind of stepped away from that stuff, because I said this was the place I was going for wrestling, and if that's not wrestling anymore, I got to get away from it. That same poison made its way into Ring of Honor. And I said, you know what? There's so much great stuff going on here at Ring of Honor. I'm going to continue to watch and just ignore this stuff, which meant I was sending Ring of Honor money to order pay-per-views, and before the main event even started, I would turn off, because I would say, this tag match or whatever, this is the real main event, not what they're doing with the Super Kick Twins, with Kenny Omaha. These are my real big problems in that group. Gallows and Anderson, or whatever they call themselves, AJ Styles, Prince Devitt, Taiji Ishimori, who's now in there. I don't have a lot of issues with this group. This isn't just hate blindly. This is hate for dumb shit that a select group of people have decided to get together and do together. But they left New Japan at some point, and that was great. And they left Ring of Honor at some point, and that was great. And they never really got involved in TNA, even though Cody was there and had a Bullet Club's jersey on, even though Jeff Jarrett and Scott D'Amore are both members of the Bullet Club, even though Cyrus is there and he's really great friends with Kenny Omaha, still TNA Wrestling remained TNA Wrestling, remained Impact Wrestling, that company that I loved, a company that I'm probably a bigger fan of than just about anybody else out there. A company that I've supported. I bought the video games. I bought the merchandise. Back in the day when Don West had those brown bag specials, I bought those. I went to the house shows. I bought merchandise for other people. I supported this thing. I spoke honestly about this thing. I said good things about this thing. When you saw me do the Super X Cup, that's TNA. Anytime I mentioned pro wrestling during an event, if I was calling it, you didn't see me shying away from mentioning TNA, as was so trendy for about 10 years. Oh, you like TNA? We don't watch it, but we think it's crap. We'd rather watch SmackDown. That's fine. Did you ever hear me say anything bad about WWE during any of that time? No, I just told you what I liked, which is what makes this video so difficult for me. This is not something that I've wanted to do. This is not something I take any joy in. I don't get any pleasure out of doing this. 5 or 6 months ago, AEW started having a working relationship / feud with TNA Impact Wrestling. And at that point, I said, let me see what happens here. Let me take some time off, right? We did a video on this channel where I talked about and we watched the clip of Kenny Omega making his debut with Cyrus and Josh Matthews, Don Callis' Cyrus. I always call him Cyrus. And they're in the trailer outside of the Impact Zone. I watched that week, and I watched Don Callis, one of the presidents, one of the vice presidents of TNA Impact Wrestling. I watched security guards backstage. I watched a shift of momentum away from TNA, what this company had built, to now everybody bowing down to Kenny Omaha and AEW. And I said, this is disgusting. This is a place that actually has wrestling. I had gone to the AEW pay-per-view. I saw one guy poured baby oil on himself to get out of a rare gut wrench. I saw another guy came out and was in a cheerleading outfit and was doing cartwheels or something, and then did some stuff to Tommy Dreamer I'm not even going to tell you about. One guy came out, looked like miniature Jay Leno, some glasses on, was doing shin kicks. We've already talked about Orange Juice Cassidy. It top to bottom was horrible. The women's match was horrible. Everything that they were doing makes no sense at all. And I said at that point, people are going to realize this. People are going to wake up, and when I talk to my wrestling friends tomorrow, they're going to agree with me. I talked to them tomorrow, and instantly I realized what I had been warned about, because I gave them my real opinions, and what I heard back was basically, don't say anything bad about Kenny Omega. Don't say anything bad. And actually, I lost friends because of this. There were certain people who could not believe that on the first night that AEW had a pay-per-view and they're going up against the Evil Empire that I stopped watching years ago, by the way, and never referred to as an evil empire, these people still loved when they were bashing TNA. All of a sudden, when they had any opportunity to go and watch something that wasn't TNA or wasn't Ring of Honor or wasn't New Japan Pro Wrestling, they went, but all of a sudden I'm the bad guy. So I said bad things about Kenny Omega. There were honest things that I saw, and some of these people stopped talking to me. But I was fine with that, because to be honest with you, there's a lot of wrestling conversations I don't want to have, and I don't want to have any conversations about the guys that throw 17 super kicks in a match, Baby Oil Boy, Orange Juice Cassidy, Kenneth Omaha, or any of the other clowns and jokers they have over there apparently doing pro wrestling. And the saddest part is, as I always tell people, all of these people are better wrestlers than they're letting on, which means Kenny Omega is actually a better wrestler. I was a fan of his in 2009 when he was in Ring of Honor on HDNet. He's a better wrestler than he's putting on, because he would much rather be a guy who dances and gyrates and makes goofy faces and does things inside the ring and outside of the ring that don't make sense, and does horrible interviews. He does interviews that if you were excited about the match and you saw him talk about the match, you might be less excited and less likely to buy the match. Skip ahead. It's TNA, it's Impact, we're going into 2021. All of a sudden, AEW is there. All of a sudden, like I said, the world champion that they had is a second-tier guy, and now here's Kenny Omega. And about a week after I saw that, I stopped watching. And I talked to somebody, and he had bad information, because this is a month later, and he said to me, oh, you can start watching TNA again because they're done with AEW. And I said, beautiful, I'm glad they're done, but I'm going to give them a couple of weeks to just finish up everything, to just get all of the AEW stuff completely out of there. And then I find out, not only has that not happened, not only have they not got AEW stuff out there, AEW is still feuding with them. And then I find out that the AEW World Champion, Kenneth Omaha, has a match with the TNA Impact Wrestling World Champion, Rich Swann, a great wrestler. And I said to myself, this is title for title, isn't it? And yes, it was. It's title for title. And what happened this week at the pay-per-view was that Kenneth Omaha somehow, and I didn't even watch the pay-per-view, somehow defeated Rich Swann, and now he's the TNA World Champion, to which I say, after 19 years of being the most loyal TNA fan, after 19 years of only saying honest things about TNA, if I thought it was bad, I said that, but I usually thought it was very good. AJ Styles, the X Division, Samoa Joe, the Knockouts Division. I mean, the company that legitimately started the women's revolution on national TV. No disrespect to Shimmer, no disrespect to Shine, no disrespect to Pro Wrestling Apple or Pro Wrestling Eve or whatever it was. But on a national stage in modern wrestling, it was TNA. TNA did so many things that have since been copied. I keep saying I'm just waiting for WWE at some point to do their version of an Ultimate X match. Like I said before, it gives me no joy. But hearing that Kenny Omega has won the championship tonight, and it's not like I'm going off crying. We all have to pack it in at some point. At some point, it is time to just go away. And I think it is time for me to just go away from Impact Wrestling. And I will not be watching Impact Wrestling anymore. I'm completely done with it. I was waiting for them to be done with AEW, and the fact that they have the most overrated pro wrestler on the planet now as their world champion, I'm done. And I'm not leaving bitter or anything else. To the people who like AEW, please keep enjoying that. It hurts me that you refer to it as pro wrestling. I don't know why you don't call it something else and just continue to enjoy it. But AEW is there for the people that like it, and Impact Wrestling is there for the people that like it. And WWE is there for the people who like it. I'm really not liking any of them. And there's so much great talent in AEW, so much great talent in TNA. Deonna Purrazzo, my girl, I know she's there killing it. I have a friend who wrestles for AEW who has been involved with TNA, and I would love to watch him wrestle. They're not doing anything with him. I won't tell you who he is, but I can't even do that for him. So it is official. I am done with TNA Wrestling. I was one of the more loyal fans in the history of that company. Always had that company's back. It's done. It's the end of an era. We've wrapped it up. I wish the best to AEW. I think that they continue to run an experiment that's not going to work for them. Maybe someday I'll do more videos and I'll go into that. I wish the best for TNA. I always have. I wish the best for them when they were Global Force. I wish the best for them when they were NWA, TNA. I hope that there is a resurgence there. I still have Major League Wrestling to go watch. I still have the new revamped NWA Power brand to go watch. I still have Ring of Honor, the best wrestling organization in the world since 2020. And if you had seen Ring of Honor before that and you weren't really that big on it, watch it now. Jonathan Gresham, Jay Lethal, The Foundation, wrestling. But hopefully Kenny Omega does not have that TNA championship that long. Hopefully there is a day when Impact Wrestling is completely done with AEW. And by the way, I'm sure there's AEW fans that are saying the same thing. Like, we don't like Impact Wrestling. We've been bashing that company and have a long-standing grudge since back when we were WWF fanboys in the Ruthless Aggression era. So they're waiting for it to be done too. Those AEW fans, they want a working relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling so they can get basically Bullet Club people together. And also there's some other guys that they saw when they were watching that company momentarily. So Kota Ibushi, Hiroshi Tanahashi, obviously Okada. There are some people they would like to see, but that style of wrestling they don't really care for. A lot of them because it's wrestling. And they're not wrestling fans. They're AEW fans. This is a new era. This is a new thing altogether that people are getting behind. Let's go to pro wrestling to laugh and be goofy and to be silly and to see something again that has no gatekeeper. There's nobody in the back who's trying to tell people that's dumb shit. Stop doing it on my TV. You're hurting my business both short term and long term and hurting this entire industry, both short term and long term. And if anybody does decide to walk past a television set while you're out there doing whatever it is that you call pro wrestling, they will either turn it off and laugh, leave the room, or if there's someone in the room watching it, they will mock this person, at which point said person will be very embarrassed. I usually don't do an entire podcast on topics. I could, but I usually don't. Again, I'm not upset. I'm not mad. To be honest with you, Impact Wrestling, much like the other wrestling leagues, have taken up a lot of time in my life. There's stuff I could go do that would be much better. Basically, I'm sure there's great stuff going on at Impact, but on the off chance that they cut to a shot or an interview or a match or a vignette or anything of the sort that has Kenneth Omaha in it, I don't want to see it. It's not worth it. I've completely written this guy off. If he wants to wrestle inflatable blow-up dolls, that's his choice. If he wants to get signed to TV spots with Ring of Honor and then send in bullshit pictures of injuries he doesn't actually have to go to Japan, that's his choice. If he wants to call himself an artist, if he wants to do whatever he wants to do, that's his choice. And the choice to watch him is your choice as much as it is mine. And I'm opting out of it. Not bitter, not sad, not upset. Love TNA. Had a great run with it. I feel like I watched the entire history of that organization. There's a million names I could mention here. Sting, Sabu, Abyss, David Young, Elix Skipper. I mean, we could go on and on. Triple X, Team Canada, all of that stuff. All of those years. Beer Money, Fortune. And that's it. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I know I'm going to get a lot of negative comments on this because as the rule goes, as I was told when I came back, don't say anything bad about Kenny Omega. As always, it has been your host, your friend, your boy, your mate, and your former TNA Impact Wrestling fan, Arachnid Soul, admitting AEW and TNA have great rosters of talent, but also nobody there who knows what to do with it in AEW, and people in Impact who are just happy to be working with AEW, I guess. And I will catch you later.